What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm back here once again for a comprehensive NBA player prop preview for this upcoming 5-game slate. Now, if you've been following these videos, I've been doing very well lately, but yesterday got absolutely destroyed.
You suck.
You suck!
You suck!
You suck!
So I'm back here for revenge.
Revenge!
Put revenge in the comments if you're going to be riding with me. If it is your first time watching this, I'll let you know I do this every single day. I take you through all the key players. We go through their matchup. We talk about their props, their form lines, tell you what I like, and I'll tell you what I don't. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the most educated betting decisions possible. I'll be sharing my screen and I'll take you all through it. Now let's get to it. Let's go. So we're starting things off with the Atlanta Hawks versus the Brooklyn Nets. Trae Young and Okongwu is still out. Cam Thomas is still out. Ben Simmons is a game-time decision for the Brooklyn Nets. So we'll start off with the Atlanta Hawks players, and then we'll see where we land. Kicking it off with DeJounte Murray, though. Firstly, his points prop is at 22.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup with the Nets is a good one. They don't stop point guards very well, but DeJounte Murray has covered this in 3 out of his last 6 games against the Nets, scored 28 points against them in their most recent matchup, despite the Nets winning by 27 points. So at first glance, I would have to lean to the over here, but obviously worth digging into a little bit deeper. His assist prop is at 7.5. That's a difficult matchup for the Brooklyn Nets. He did have 5 assists the last time they matched up, and he's hit this in 3 out of his last 10. He's covered in 3 out of his last 6 against the Nets. Looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 5.5. The matchup's not bad or good. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. He has been hitting 4 rebounds consecutively for a very long time. So if you're looking at a safer leg for your parlays, that could be it. Rebound against Brooklyn has done it quite well. 4 out of his last 6. So that's DeJounte Murray. Moving into Bogdanovic, his points prop has dropped. It's now 16.5. I remember it being higher than that against the Brooklyn Nets. He only scored 11 points, though. He's covered this line in 3 out of his last 10, and against the Nets, he's covered in 3 out of his last 7. One bet of his that is hitting quite well, I believe, is his assist prop, but that's just moved. So this was at 2.5. It's just moved to 3.5. He's covered 3 a lot, really. That seems to be his max on most occasions, but at 3.5 plus money, I'm not particularly fond of that. The matchup's difficult. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, and he's covered this in only 1 of his last 7. I will say that the Atlanta Hawks just got blown out by the Brooklyn Nets. I imagine we don't see a repeat of that. So Atlanta should be better positioned in this game, I'd imagine. But who else have we got? Let's go into Jalen Johnson. His points prop is at 16.5. The matchup with Brooklyn is difficult. He went under last time, scoring 14 points. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10. And he's now hit this under in 6 consecutive games against the Brooklyn Nets. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 3.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, got 0 assists against the Nets in the last matchup. He's gone under in 6 consecutive games against them. And looking at his rebound prop, the line's at 9.5. He did go under in that game too. 6 out of his last 10 and in 6 consecutive games against Brooklyn. So Brooklyn is a difficult matchup for power forwards, have been all year. Jalen Johnson has been playing well lately, but ran into the Brooklyn Nets and went under in all props. Looking at Clint Capella, though, his line is at 9.5. He's hit in 6 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup, and he has gone under in 4 consecutive games. Against Brooklyn, he's covered this in 2 out of his last 6. Only scored 7 points in their last matchup. Looking at his rebound prop, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Once again, it's a difficult matchup, and he's hit this in 4 out of his last 6. But he did have 6 rebounds the last time they played. So nothing there is really screaming out to me. I do have a play in mind, and it's on Nick Claxton. So let's jump into Nick. So looking at his points prop, line's at 10.5. The matchup against Atlanta, it's on the more difficult side, but it's not a hard one. But he's only covered this in 2 out of his last 10. Looking at games against Atlanta, he's covered in 3 out of his last 6, but he has struggled in his last 2. Into his rebound prop, we can see that the line's at 9.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. Against Atlanta, he has covered in 5 out of his last 6, but did only have 8 rebounds in that blowout the last time they played. The play that I was actually looking at, to be honest, was an under in his PRA. So check this out. There we go. So he's gone under 23.5 points, rebounds, assists in 9 out of his last 10 games. One game he did go over was against the Spurs, and all centers go off against the Spurs. Must be a Wemby thing. But outside of that, my man has been struggling. And in head-to-head matchups, last two games against Atlanta has really struggled. 18 and then 15. This was a blowout game, but he still played 28 minutes. He played 28 minutes in both of those games. Looking at his last 5 games, he's averaging 28 minutes anyway. So despite the blowout that happened the last time they played, still played his average minutes, which is 28. And he's been playing 28 minutes throughout all of these games where he's been struggling, I believe. Even that game he went off against the Spurs, he only played 27 minutes. So I don't think the blowout was a factor which drove the result lower. He still played his normal minutes and he shit the bed. So I'm taking the under Nick Claxton. I'm not encouraging anyone else to do it, just being very transparent. That's what I'm doing. Let's have a look. So he does have a great matchup. I remember coming into this, I remember previewing this, of course, it was just not too long ago, about it. And I remember saying that Mikal Bridges is inconsistent as hell, but he loves playing the Hawks. So if you check out his head-to-head form, 24, 42, 45, 32, then only 15 points. Now, in this particular game, I'm pretty sure he scored 10 points in the first quarter. Like, it looked like he was going to absolutely destroy them, and I think someone else took over. But, yeah, he's covered in 4 of his last 10, 4 out of his last 5 against them. I'm not betting on this guy. I never do. But 5 out of his last 10, he's covered his assist prop. And head-to-head, he's covered in 3 consecutive games now against the Atlanta Hawks. That's not bad. Minus 119, I'm not a fan of, but it's not bad. Looking at his rebound prop, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 5 games against Atlanta, which is great. And he's covered in only 3 of his last 10 games overall. So quite inconsistent. Against Atlanta, his rebounds, assists, pretty strong. Points quite strong as well, despite the last game falling off. But it was a blowout, right? So you've got to factor that in. Cam Johnson, I'm pretty sure he went off against them. Let me double check. His line's at 15.5. Yeah, it was him. He scored 29 points in that game, which is amazing. He's got a pretty good matchup in head-to-head matches. He killed him every single time too. Cam Johnson, he's covered this line in 5 consecutive games against Atlanta. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 3.5. He's covered in 2 out of his last 10, but 2 of his last 5 against Atlanta. And his rebound prop is 4.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 and 3 out of his last 5 against Atlanta. So he didn't get too many rebounds. I think this points prop does probably need to be investigated a little bit further because it must be a thing against Atlanta. Also, Ben Simmons playing, I don't know if that helps or if it takes minutes away from Cam Johnson. Looking at 3-pointers, I wonder if he just buries them with threes. He hit 7 in that last game, I know that. But in most games, he's hit threes against them quite well. But yeah, Cam Johnson, I think I'll add that to my lean list. I think that's one to really look into a little bit further. I already know I'm taking the Nick Claxton under in PRAs. I don't have to write that one down. But let's jump into the next game. It's the Utah Jazz versus the Miami Heat. So once again, Tyler Hero is a game time decision in this one. So is Kevin Love and Martin from the Miami Heat. Walker Kessler's a game time decision for the Utah Jazz. So we'll start with the boys from the Jazz. Now, Keontae George is an interesting one. So he has been playing quite well lately. I had a quick look at the lines earlier, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to bet on this guy. I really considered it. I haven't done it yet, so it's clearly a lean. But his points prop, he's covered in 6 out of his last 10. He does have a difficult match against Miami, but he scored 21 points when they played 31st of December. So has played well against Miami before. His recent form isn't too bad. Looking at his assist prop, it's 5.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. So he's been racking up the assists. His matchup isn't bad, but against Miami, he only had 2 assists last time. So then I thought, what about if we do his points and assists? This is what I was looking at earlier. Obviously, he covered that last time against Miami. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. The difficult matchup on the point side of thing has me a little bit worried, but looking through his minutes, he's playing a lot of minutes, a decent number of minutes. He shoots a lot of 3-pointers. He's shooting threes at 40% over his last 10 games on an average of 7 attempts per game. So guaranteeing points. Making a free throw, that guarantees 10 points if we're looking at his averages. And then he's making 2 to 3 layups or mid-ranges, right? So that's another 6. So over his last 10, he's averaging 16 points per game. So he should cover the points prop. And the assist side of things, he's been clearing that quite well lately. So that's what I'm on the fence about with Keontae George. He's on my lean list at the moment, but I don't know if there's any more information I can find out to make that decision a little bit easier. But that's Keontae George. Who else do we have? Colin Sexton to get through. His points prop is at 17.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. The matchup isn't good nor bad. And in head-to-head matchup, scored 22 points the last time these teams played, 14 points in the first game, 24 in 25 minutes. Over his last 10 games, we're seeing almost 28 minutes per game from Colin Sexton. So the minutes will definitely be there. The shot attempts should be there. He is quite aggressive, but I don't hate it. Honestly, I wouldn't back the under, that's for sure. I'm just on the fence on whether I take the over. But what I have done with Colin Sexton with a bit of success is to play an alternate line of 15 points as part of my parlay. So you can see over his last 20 games, he scored 15 plus points in 17 of those games. But he's also covered this line of 17.5 in 15 of his last 20, which is a very high hit rate. So Colin Sexton should get very close to that number. Looking at his assist prop, it's 5.5. It's very high. I'd honestly lead to the under just by looking at that. But he's covered this in 3 out of his last 10. The matchup isn't too bad. And in head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 2 consecutive games against Miami. So that's quite interesting. Rebound prop, I would never entertain that for Colin Sexton. What I'm starting to learn is taking guards for rebounds is a very stressful thing because a lot of the time they don't earn those rebounds. It kind of falls in their lap. And if it doesn't fall in their lap, you're going to get burnt. Whereas your bigs, they're going to go get them. Your Miles Bridges, your Clint Capellas, whoever it's going to be, they'll go get those boards. Whereas a lot of guards, they don't play like that. So who else we got? Lauri Markkanen. His points prop is 20.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Does have a difficult matchup here against Miami, but he's had some success. He's covered in 2 of his last 3. The difficult thing is he only scored 12 points the last time these teams played. Looking at his rebound prop, the line's at 8.5. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games. And looking at head-to-head matchups, he's only covered 1 of his last 3. So he has had some pretty poor games against the Miami Heat. If we look at his PRA, I think one thing that's very important, this is a road game for Utah. And a lot of these Utah players tend to struggle on the road. I don't know if Lauri's the same, but I'll quickly flick through. So this is his PRA. He's covered his PRA in 4 of his last 10, but he's covered it in 11 of his last 20. But if we look at just his last 10 road games, he's covered in 4 of his last 10, but he's gone under in 5 consecutive games on the road. So looking at those teams, Brooklyn is a difficult matchup, believe it or not. The Knicks, somewhat difficult. The Suns, that's a difficult matchup. Atlanta's an easy matchup. He should have eaten them alive. And Orlando's somewhat on the difficult side. Now, it doesn't get much easier. Miami's pretty good defensively as well. But yeah, look, I would lean to the under on Lauri Markkanen's PRA, but not with too much confidence. Because the last game he played in Miami, he scored 38 points, 8 rebounds, and got 1 assist. That's an interesting one. John Collins, very good to us this year. His points props at 13.5. He's got this in 6 out of his last 10 games. So John Collins playing power forward. He's also playing some center as well. But looking at the matchup, difficult one against Bam Adebayo, right? So at the moment, Miami are allowing the fewest points to centers on the season. He's covered this in 6 of his last 10, and he only scored 10 points the last time he played the Miami Heat. Looking at his rebound prop, though, that's at 8.5, and he's been eating these rebounds up quite well. Check it out, 8 out of his last 10. The matchup isn't too difficult to get boards against Miami. He did go under last time. He only had 6 rebounds. But when was that? That was in the end of December. So if we're looking at his last 20 games, we only go back to mid-Jan, and we can see he's covered this line in 14 of his last 20 games. If you're looking at an alt line for parlays, 7 looks like a good number here. He's hit 7 plus rebounds in 17 of his last 20. So, and if you go to 6 plus rebounds, he's covered 6 plus rebounds in 19 of his last 20 games. So John Collins for your parlays could be a good play. And who else is there in this game? We've got Miami to go through. Terry Rozier. I haven't looked at Terry Rozier too much. He always seems to be injured. Let's have a look. In terms of points, he does have a difficult matchup against Utah, but he's covered his points prop of 16.5 in 5 of his last 10. He's yet to verse Utah since joining the Miami Heat, though. How many games has he been back from injury? Looks like 2 games. He played 2 games. He played 30 and 32 minutes. So no minutes restriction for Terry. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 4.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. Has gone under in his last 2 games since returning from his injury. And rebounds are at 3.5. He's covered this in 8 of his last 10. And he's also covered it in both games since he returned from injury. The matchup is pretty good too. So I'd obviously lean to the over, but we're looking at minus 150 odds here for Terry Rozier. Not the type of odds that I like to take for a single, but if you're just looking for higher or lower, then Terry Rozier to go over his 3.5 rebound, I think that's a great pick. Tyler Hero, if he does play, his points prop is at 18.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10 games. The matchup isn't good or bad against Utah. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3. 18.5, though. I wonder if he comes back with any types of minutes restriction. He hasn't played in over a week, so that'll be one to watch out for. Assist prop is at 4.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10 and 2 of his last 3 against the Jazz. And looking at his rebound prop, that's 4.5 as well. He's covered in 6 of his last 10, and he's covered in all games against Utah. In those games, though, playing at least 36 minutes against the Jazz, averaging 32 minutes in his last 10 games, and he's back off an injury. I wonder if he sees over 30 minutes in this one. So I personally won't be betting on any Tyler Hero markets for that very reason. But Jimmy Butler, that might be someone that I do bet on. So firstly, his points prop we're looking at is 7 of his last 10 games. He's covered this 21.5. Head-to-head matchups against Utah, 24 points and then 8 points earlier this season. That was a very strange game. Jimmy only played, he must have gotten injured in this game, right? Because he only played 22 minutes. He only attempted 3 shots in that time span. So I wouldn't put too much weight into that one because as of late, he's been playing 35 minutes a game, taking 14 shots and getting to the free throw line almost 10 times. His assists, I'm sure this looks good too. 5 out of his last 10. Matchup is great. He's got under his assist both times against Utah, though. And looking at his rebound prop, the line's at 5.5. He's covered this in 8 of his last 10. Matchup supposedly difficult, and he's covered this in 1 of his last 2. Obviously, this game he played limited minutes, 8 rebounds prior to that. So, yeah, Jimmy Butler, he's one that I thought of. What I'm probably going to lean on for Jimmy, I'm probably just going to take him 20 points and Heat money line. You'll probably get close to plus 100 odds for that. And the reason being is, Utah sucks on the road. Miami playing quite well lately at home, close to full health, and Jimmy's been covering 20 points very consistently. So that's definitely a thought in my mind at the moment. Let's have a look at Bam Adebayo. His points prop is 22.5. It's the highest for all the Miami Heat players. He's only covered this in 3 out of his last 10. The matchup is pretty decent for him, though. And against Utah, he scored 32, 16, and then 28 points. So he has had some very big games against them. Looking at jumped out when I wasn't supposed to. Looking at his assist prop, line's at 3.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup against Utah, but he's only hit this in 1 of his last 3. Looking at his rebounds prop, he's covered this in 1 of his last 3. He had 16 rebounds the last time he played Utah, though. So that's pretty wild. And then looking at his last 10 games, he's only covered in 4 out of his last 10. So Bam's seeing very elevated lines in this one. The sports books are really thinking he's due for a big game, or they're trying to bait you into taking it under. So either way, I shan't be touching that one. But Jimmy Butler, 20 points, Miami Heat money line. I think that's something that I'm going to take. We're jumping into a rematch here of the Portland Trailblazers versus the Memphis Grizzlies. There's only markets available for Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons. Luke Kennard, game time decision. I think Jaren Jackson is as well. DeAndre Ayton apparently still out, but he could be a game time decision. But let's jump in an outlier anyway and check the injury list for both of these teams. Check this out. So many people are out. Apparently DeAndre Ayton's out with a right hand sprain. And for the Grizzlies, you've got to expand this further because there's so many people out. I don't know if this game's worth betting on. Well, it probably is, but you've got to wait till all the markets are available. I took Jeremy Grant for the over, and he only scored 10 points. He had 10 points at halftime. Portland was destroying them, and I think he took 2 shots in the second half and missed them all. So, but this is Jeremy Grant for you. 5 of his last 10 he's covered, and he's covered in 3 of his last 5. Obviously, his previous form, very strong against the Grizz. I took him as an over, and shit happened. So you can eat shit, Jeremy Grant. Probably scores 30, but Anthony Simons, his line's at 23.5. He also had a very quiet game, only scored 7 points. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 on head-to-head matchups. He had covered 31 and 26 points prior to this. Then he finished with 7. So you'd think he probably would have racked up a lot of assists too. And he did. He got 8 assists, which is covered in 4 out of his last 10. He's now covered that in 2 of 3 games against them. So I think this is a good game. You just glance at. I think looking at a lot of these role players who could get limited action, could be some sneaky value in their line. So I'm just having a look at the box score now to see. Maybe there are certain players that you can look out for. So Jabari Walker for the Portland Trail Blazers, 19 and 10. Pretty big game. Banted had 19 points. Duop Reith, my man from Australia, but he's actually from Africa. But he scored 18 points. He took the most shots for the Portland Trail Blazers, 16 shots in this game. So they're probably some key call-outs that you want to look out for. And then for Memphis, we had Laravia. He scored 21 points, 7 for 13. And Lamar Stevens had 19 points. And then everybody else sucked. So depending on who plays, I think Quiet Money Will, he took Santiago Dama under in points. I think it was under 13.5. He only scored 6 points in this game. He was 3 for 10 from the field. But another one I'd consider taking the under is Vince Williams Jr. His points prop in this particular game was at 15.5. If it's 15.5 again, I'd probably take the under because I think he's only covered that in one of his last 10. But I'll check Outlier again in the morning before the games start and probably make some more bets if I find anything that I fancy. As always, check the pinned comment. That's where my final bets end up if you do decide to ride with me. But I strongly encourage you to learn to research and find your own bets. There's no better feeling than finding your own. So we're jumping into the Denver Nuggets versus the Los Angeles Lakers. So quite a few game time decisions in this one. Of course, LeBron James, Anthony Davis. But for Denver, Jamal Murray and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope are game time decisions as well. So we'll have a look at the players that are available, and then we'll see what we can find. So we'll start with Jamal Murray. So thanks to Outlier, it tells us Jamal Murray is also questionable after tweaking his ankle Thursday night. If Caldwell-Pope is unable to suit up, the Nuggets could turn to Christian Braun and Peyton Watson to soak up some of the available wing minutes. So I like this about Outlier. Not only do they tell you who's injured, but they tell you the reason why, and they give you some news about it too. So you'll know if it's an illness, an injury, personal issues, yada, yada, yada. So, but let's look at Jamal Murray. His points prop would be at 22.5. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10. The matchup with the Lakers is not a difficult one. And in head-to-head matchup, my man has eaten them alive. 7 out of his last 10 games, he's gone over his points line against the Los Angeles Lakers. Looking at his assist prop, line's at 6.5. He's only covered in 4 of his last 10. The matchup's not too bad. And against the Lakers, he's covered in 1 of his last 10. His last game, he had 11 assists against them, which is crazy. And at his rebound prop, that's at 3.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Against LA, he's covered this in 8 of his last 10. So he does have a good matchup there. So if we're looking at Jamal singles, the rebound one I definitely like the most. It is at minus 145. The points prop's not too bad as well, given he likes to play against the Lakers. So if you want to get sexy with it, you might look at his points plus rebounds. That's 26.5. And you can see he's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. He's got a pretty decent matchup. If you look at his last 10, he has only covered it in 3 of his last 10. I understand that, but these things don't happen by accident, right? Certain players like playing against certain teams defend a certain way, and Jamal Murray clearly taking advantage of that against the Los Angeles Lakers. If we're going to stick with Denver, let's go with Nikola Jokic. Points prompts at 27.5. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10. He's actually only covered this at 43% this year. So the matchup's not the hardest one. It's not an easy one. It does have AD to deal with. But looking at head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in only 4 of his last 10 games against LA. This is a road game. We might want to check his road games only against LA. And he's gone over this in 1 of 5 games on the road against the Los Angeles Lakers. These are his last 10 road games, though, and he's covered in 7 of his last 10. So a bit of contradicting information. Doesn't make it easy for us. Looking at his assists, it is an easier matchup against the Lakers, who give up the 6th most assists to centers on the season. Jokic has covered this in 4 out of his last 10, and against the Lakers, he's covered in 5 of his last 10. If you want to look at away games only, we can see he's gone over his assist prop in only 1 of 5 games against the Lakers. And in his last 10 road games, he's only gone over this 3 times. Looking at rebounds, his line is at 12.5. He's got a great matchup. 5 of his last 10 games he's gone over. Against the Los Angeles Lakers, he has covered in 7 out of his last 10. Looking at his away games against the Lakers, he's covered in 3 of his last 5. And his last 10 away games, 5 out of his last 10. So, nothing really strong screaming out to me for Nikola Jokic. Obviously, maybe 10 rebounds is a safe one for your parlays, but even 12.5 is at minus 35. I can only imagine how short the odds will be if you take him for 10. I personally won't be betting on Nikola Jokic. in this game. Let's head over to the LA Lakers and see what we can find here. D'Lo. Now he's been doing this quite well lately. A lot of people have been betting on D'Lo, but he does come up against. He's got the opposite lines to Jamal Murray, really. So D'Lo, very consistent, killing it in his last 10, 8 of his last 10. Has a difficult matchup against Denver, and he's always struggled against Denver. 5 consecutive games now, he has struggled to score points. The max he scored is 11 points against the Denver Nuggets. Now, a few games he did play limited minutes, right? But you want to look at maybe these 2 games are the best example where he scored 10 and 11 points. He did shoot 8 and 12 times, though. If we're looking at how he's playing over his last 10 games, he's shooting the ball almost 16 times per game, and he's playing 36 minutes. So I probably lean to the over on this one, but I think it'll be close. I personally am not betting on D'Lo. If you see people betting on D'Lo points because of his last 10 games, you better hope that in their explanation or in their write-up, they've given you a reason as to why this isn't going to happen again. Looking at D'Lo's assists, though, the line for that is 5.5. He's covered that in 6 of his last 10. Once again, it's a difficult matchup. And against Denver, he's covered this in 1 of 5 games. He did have 7 assists the last time they played. So I think the assist prop I could probably muck around with a little bit. Maybe an alternate line for D'Lo, but that's all I'd be taking D'Angelo Russell on. Jumping into Austin Reeves, his points prop is at 14.5. He's gone under in 4 straight, but he's covered in 5 of his last 10. The matchup with Denver is a difficult one, but once again, Contavious Caldwell-Pope may not be playing, who's one of their better perimeter defenders. Against Denver, Austin Reeves has covered this line in 6 out of his last 9 games. So I don't mind that. But what I have been playing for Austin Reeves lately is just for him to score 10 points. 10 points. He's done that in his last 8 games against Denver, and he's done it in his last 9 games straight. So what else is there for Austin Reeves? His assist prop, 6 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 4.5. He's covered 4+ in 10 straight games. The matchup is a difficult one. In head-to-head games, he's covered in 4 out of his last 9. He's gone over 4 assists in 5 of those games. So not really feeling Austin Reeves too much there. Rui Hachimura. What's Rui been doing? Here we go. So we've got a little update here from Outlier. So LeBron James has routinely been on Los Angeles injury report with his left ankle injury, but he has been available for the previous 3 games without significant limitations. His status Saturday will presumably depend on how his ankle is feeling closer to game time. Some combination of Cam Reddish, Taurean Prince, and Rui Hachimura would have presumably absorbed LeBron James' minutes if the Lakers ultimately opt to err on the side of caution. So LeBron James is about to hit 40,000 career points. So if LeBron James does play this game, I have a feeling they're going to lose. Because isn't there like, I think I've seen this or someone's spoken about it before, where if LeBron James reaches a milestone, whatever team he's playing on loses. Whenever he breaks a record or whatever, they lose that game. Milestone games, they lose. The Mamba game for Kobe, they lost. So I don't know if you guys believe in that type of stuff, but there's a bit of news for LeBron. But we're talking about Rui Hachimura here. He's covered this line in 6 of his last 10 games. The line's at 11.5. Head-to-head matchups against Denver. He's covered in 3 out of his last 6, but he has gone under in 3 consecutive games. He does have a difficult matchup too. LeBron James, he is a difficult matchup, but he is LeBron James after all. Points props at 26.5. He's covered this in 4 consecutive games. Against Denver, he's only covered this in 2 of his last 9 games. So that's quite interesting. Looking at his assist prop, find his assist prop in this one, 7.5. He's covered this in 7 of his last 10. He's hit this in 6 consecutive games. Against Denver, he's covered in 6 out of his last 9. What's a little bit concerning is that the 2 games this season, he's gone under with 5 and 7. So this is all from last year in the playoffs, whereas 5 and 7 were his most recent ones from this year. Rebound-wise, his rebound props over the last 10 games have been inconsistent. 4 of his last 10, difficult matchup. Against Denver, he's rebounded like an absolute beast, whether it was this season or last season. He's covered this in 8 of his last 9. He had 8 and 9 rebounds the last time that these teams played. Reason being is LeBron James will most likely pick up Aaron Gordon for the majority of the time. He's not the best shooter. LeBron James does what he does best, sags off, collects stats and rebounds. So I think the rebound prop is a good play. I wouldn't worry about this in the last 10. But yeah, I'm not too sure. Maybe, look, you might just be smart to take LeBron 26 and 6 perhaps, because those he hits quite well. But Who else is there? Anthony Davis. His points prop is 23.5. He has covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. He's got a good matchup. Denver don't particularly defend centers all that well, but against Denver, he's only covered in 3 out of his last 9. He did score 32 points the last time these guys played, and that was in LA as well. If we look at the last 10 and we just look at Anthony Davis at home, he's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Head to head, these are all the games played in LA against Denver. He's only covered in 2 out of his last 5. So, but look, that's Anthony Davis. He's always been inconsistent. I don't think that'll change. You just got to find the right day for him. So, rebound wise, check this out. 7 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 12.5 rebounds. Does have a difficult matchup, but he's covered in 5 of his last 9 games against Denver. But the 2 games against Denver this season, he had 8 and 9 rebounds. So, not a lot that I'm loving in this game, I've got to tell you. Not to say that these things won't happen. Like when I say I don't love them, it means there's a lot of uncertainty. If I didn't think Anthony Davis would go over, I would bet the under, right? You do have the option of betting both. What I'm saying is there's a lot of contradictions in the data, and I can honestly both. I can see Anthony Davis getting 15 rebounds. I can see him getting 8. Like it's fucked up. So AD, I'm not feeling too much of that. I think my philosophy around making these picks is if I'm not feeling it, just don't bet it, right? So jumping into the last game, it's the Houston Rockets versus the Phoenix Suns. So in this particular game, Bradley Beal's a game time decision, but I think he's going to play. Eric Gordon's a game time decision too. We'll start with these Houston Rockets. So we took Fred VanVleet under 6.5 assists the last time these guys played. And the one thing that I find difficult still to this day is when the same team has to play the same team again. Teams tend to make adjustments and then different players stand out, tactics, all that type of bullshit. So it's very hard to predict these games. I'm just calling it out. It's a trap, I tell you. But we took his assists, so we'll see what his assists look like. 14.5 is his points prop. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10, 21 points against the Phoenix Suns in their last game. He's now covered 20 plus points in 2 consecutive games against Phoenix. The matchup is a good one, but my question is, do Phoenix now adjust and limit Fred VanVleet's effectiveness scoring the ball, or does Phoenix continue to play the same way given that they won the last game, right? Because they shut down Şengün, their backcourt really turned. It's Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green. So, but looking at Fred's assist prop, now it's 6.5 to go the over. I don't like that. The under is 6.5. So we took the under 6.5 last time, and I'm pretty sure it was like plus 100. Now the line's still 6.5, but minus 145. Look, he has gone under in 8 of his last 10, and he's never gone over it against the Phoenix Suns. But I think at those odds, I don't know if I'm willing to play it. I do think he will go under, but this is where they get you, right? So be cautious when taking shit odds like this, because if you take enough of them and then you only hit them at 60%, you're going to be losing. So factor all that in before you make your final decision. Looking at Fred's rebounds, he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. The Suns, he had 6 rebounds last time and then 5 rebounds in the matchup prior to that. So he has rebounded quite well against the Suns. He scored quite well against them too. So you might be feeling a Fred VanVleet over in points and rebounds, 17.5, because he's covered this 17.5 in points alone. Now you get the added benefit of having rebounds in there. That could be a decent play. Looking at his last 10, you'd be a crazy man to look at this and say, I'm going over points and rebounds. But he's got a good matchup for points. The points prop alone, I think, might be worth looking at. So I'm going to add that to my list. It's been a while. It's been a few games since I've had to add somebody to this. But Fred VanVleet, points and rebounds. I'll check that out a little bit later. Who else have we got here? Jalen Green. So Jalen Green just went off against the Phoenix Suns. What are the chances they let him do that again? So he scored 34 points. His line's only at 17.5, right? He's up against the same team. He scored 34 points against them. The line's at 17.5. What does that tell you? The books think he's going under. The books don't think he can replicate that. This could indicate some people might look at the 34 and like, yeah, he scored 34. Line's only 17.5. Let's take it. Who the fuck knows? But he's covered this in 3 of his last 10. He's now covered in 4 of his last 6 games against Phoenix. So that would tell me to go over as well. It all leans to the over. But looking at his last 10 games, very inconsistent. You might want to just look at his road games perhaps. And that he's covered in 5 of his last 10, so it's a bit better. But yeah, Jalen Green is one of those players. It's a little bit difficult to bet on him. Now, his assist prop is 3.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. Does have a good matchup, but he's only covered in 2 of his last 6 against the Suns. And his rebound prop is at 4.5. He's covered in 3 straight, 5 of his last 10, has a good matchup, and he's covered in 3 of his last 6 games against the Suns. So yeah, I'm not feeling Jalen Green, to be honest with you. Dylan Brooks, where's Dylan Brooks? Here he is. Damn. So his points prop was 12.5 in the last game. Only scored 6 points. Hoping it would be 12.5 again, and I was going to take that straight away. Does have a very difficult matchup. The Suns allow the second fewest points to small forwards on the season. He's hit this line in 6 of his last 10, though. But the 2 games against Phoenix this year, he scored 2 points and 6 points. He played 25 and 30 minutes in those games. He did foul out in the first game. The last game, he only picked up 1 foul. So he got to play his full complement of 30 minutes. He did only shoot 3 from 11, and he didn't make a 3-pointer. So 0 for 6 from downtown for Dylan Brooks. But, man, you'd have to be – this guy's going to play 30 minutes, 10.5. You could take the under. Yeah, it's not – he's hit the under in 4 of 10, only 36% of games this year. So, yeah, I'd probably lean to the under given the fact that Dylan Brooks is going to be defending everybody in this game. But 10.5, that's a very sweaty bet. That's at risk at every point in the game, right? Jabari Smith Jr., his points props at 13.5. He does have a decent matchup, but he only scored 11 points the last time against the Suns. Has covered in 3 of his last 6, though. I wouldn't take that, and I wouldn't completely take the under either. But his rebound prop, I might be interested in this. So this has moved up. I think it was 8.5 the last time they played, but he's now put together 4 consecutive games with massive rebound efforts. 16, 17, 13, and then 16 rebounds again against the Phoenix Suns. The matchup is supposed to be difficult, but he cleared that quite well. And in looking at the head-to-head, he's gotten 16 rebounds in 2 consecutive games against the Phoenix Suns. So given these teams have already played each other twice, there's a bit of a trend that I'm seeing with a few players. And if you believe that Lightning can strike 3 times in a row and the same thing happens, then you're looking at Jabari Smith Jr. to kill it on the boards. We know that. You're looking at Fred VanVleet to go over points and rebounds. What else are the things? You're looking at Dylan Brooks under in points because those things have happened in all the games so far. But let's have a look at Alperen Sengun. So I do like the rebounds for Jabari Smith Jr. Don't get me wrong. That is quite convincing. But again, I'll look into that a bit further. Sengun. So his points props at 19.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 10. Only scored 8 points against Phoenix last time. Does have a diff up, and he's only gone over in 1 of his last 6 games against the Suns. He went under in both games against Phoenix this season. Looking at his assist prop, he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He does have a good matchup, but he only had 4 assists last time. He's gone under his assist prop in 6 consecutive games. So, seeing the pattern here? Like, even he goes under his assists in both times. His rebound props at 8.5. He's covered this 6 out of his last 10. Only had 3 rebounds against Phoenix. He had 12 and 3 rebounds. All right, so there we go. A little bit of variety coming in here. But I'm personally looking at taking... And so his rebounds are inconsistent, but his points, we're starting to see a pattern. I'm taking the under in his points, I believe. I'm pretty confident. Not confident, but I'm pretty confident I'm going to place the bet. Under 24.5 points because he's only gone over 1 of 6 games against Phoenix. And in his last 10, he's only gone over 3 times. So his points plus assist prop. I think I'm going to take the under on that. But let's check out some of these Phoenix Suns, shall we? We'll start with D Book. So his points props at 26.5. He just had a big game against against Houston. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup is somewhat difficult, but Devin Booker has now covered in 3 out of his last 5. He scored 25, then 35 in the games against Houston this season. His assist prop is at 4.5. He went under in both games against the Houston Rockets. And in his last 10, he's covered in 5 out of his last 10. The Rockets do allow the fewest assists to point guards on the season. And for Devin Booker's rebound prop, we're looking at he's covered in 4.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. 7 rebounds against Houston. He's gone over his rebound line in his last 2 games against the Rockets. So more trends, baby, more trends. I don't know. I might cook up a massive multi or parlay, saying and parlay. If the same props that have hit in the first 2 games of the season where these guys have played, if they happen again, I'm going to be rich because I do have a bonus bet and I might muck around and put it on. So let's see how we go. There's still more players to get through. Bradley Beal, if he does play, his points prop is at 16.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. His last game was the middle of February, though, and we're into the start of March, so he's missed half a month. So I wouldn't confidently take any Bradley Beal props right now. There's his assists. He was hitting quite well before he got injured. And then his rebounds, they were also doing quite well before he got injured. So Bradley Beal, just be cautious. His lines are low for. Let's have a look at Kevin Durant. So his lines are low too, but I don't know the reason. His points prop is at 23.5. He's got a great matchup against Houston. He scored 24 points against them last time, but I think his line was higher than that, 24.5, I believe. 7 out of his last 10 games, he's covered this points line. He's covered it in all 3 games against the Houston Rockets. So Kevin Durant overs. There's another trend for you in points. Looking at his assists, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10, 3 consecutive games now. And against the Rockets, he's covered it in every single game. And I think he's rebounded very well against them too. Checking out his rebound prop, 6.5. Covered that the last game against Houston. 6 out of his last 10. And he's covered it in all games against the Rockets. So there's another trend for you. And the matchup is excellent. So I'm most likely going to pay Kevin Durant over in his PRA. Obviously, he's been hitting his rebounds and his assist prop quite well against the Rockets. And as of late, and he has a good matchup. And that points line of 23.5 for Kevin Durant, I find that disrespectful. I think he's too good to have a line that low. I think he clears that PRA of 35.5. But just check the pin comment and see where I ultimately land. I could make a pivot to just rebounds and assists or just one of them, right? So Yusuf Nurkic, his points prop is 11.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup is on the more difficult side, but he did score 16 points last time against them. He had 16 points and then 8 points in the game prior. Looking at his assist prop, the line is at 2.5. He's gone under both times against the Rockets, but he has covered in 8 of his last 10 games. So this is where he does get a lot of assists, but the matchup is difficult, and he hasn't got it done against the Rockets in the past. So I'd be hesitant to play Yusuf Nurkic assists there. Rebounds, that line's at 10.5. Matchup is on the difficult side, but he did 13 rebounds last time, covered in 4 of his last 10, 13 and 10 rebounds in the 2 games against the Houston Rockets. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling my Nurkic in this one, but there's a lot of players here with some very interesting trends. So I'm going to cook up. Look, screw it. I've got a free bet anyway. I'm going to use my free bet. I'm going to take all the players that happened in the both 2 games this season, the ones that are convincing, of course, like Fred VanVleet's overs, Durant overs, Jabari Smith rebounds, Dylan Brooks unders, Şengün unders in points, or probably just points. So the ones, Devin Booker over in points, under in assists, so all of those, I'm going to fuck around for a little bit. I'll put those in a mega parlay, and then if that does hit, I'm going to be famous in the sports gambling world. But I'll see. I'll put that together and I'll write it up for you if you guys are interested in tailing. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you all about is this channel's performance. We're very close. I think we're like 150 subscribers away from getting 4,000 subscribers. That's the very next milestone. I know that on the weekends, there's extra attention to content. More people have more time to watch. So if it's your first time, I encourage you to follow this and subscribe to this channel. We're so close to getting to 4,000 subscribers. We're glowing up. We're growing quick. That's all I'm going to say about it. But if you do want to see more of my content, I encourage you to check out this video. So this video is about all the losses and the bad habits and stuff that people do around betting that keep them poor. I put a lot of effort into this video. It didn't get many hits, but I understand that it's a slight pivot on what I usually do. I wasn't previewing any bets, but it's called 5 betting habits that are keeping you poor. And the reason why I'm encouraging you guys to watch it, I've watched it back again today, is because after today's disastrous effort on the bets, I found myself slipping into some of these habits. I was starting to get emotional because I was staying close to the games. I almost put extra bets on to try to chase my losses. I didn't, but those habits do exist, and it's really important that you make yourself aware of them. So check it out. It'll be posted up right here. It only goes for 5 minutes. So check out that video, 5 betting habits keeping you poor. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.